nailed the early thesis, which is that like these monolithic blockchains weren't going to be able to handle the world's compute as the world's compute moved onto a blockchain. I think you nailed that thesis, but so did some other folks, I'd say, right? And people approached this problem from different angles. So like the Ethereum crowd, I would say, approached this from by building L2s, like the Optimisms and Arbitrums of the world. The folks at Cosmos are working on like the app chain thesis, right, where they build these different zones. What you guys have done is, so you've got like the C chain where tell me if my understanding of this is wrong, but like C chain kind of settles the smart contracts. You've got the X chain for like asset swaps, and then you've got the P chain for metadata. Then every application, whether it's like a game or an NFT thing, can go build their own zone within these subnets, or excuse me, can go build their own subnet. So maybe can you explain like why you think the subnet strategy is the right strategy here?
Sure. So in a nutshell, the reason why the subnet strategy makes sense is that the subnets provide a uniform architecture for everybody to plug into and to cooperate well together. So think about your L2s. Think about any other discombobulated design where someone says, I'll give you just the base, you do whatever you like on top. What's going to happen in those cases, I've been saying this for a while now, and we're seeing exactly this play out. First of all, the technologies that direction, that vision is yielding are not decentralized. People end up building highly centralized L2s. Those highly centralized L2s are no better. They do not carry over any of the inherent properties of the layer one underneath. They're not censorship proof, for example. And they award all MEV to a single actor. They end up essentially recreating the traditional world that we have with people front running, etc., in the blockchain system. In contrast, when you go to subnets, you have a uniform architecture. Yes, anybody can create their subnet, and all of those subnets they provide the same API. So when it's time to interact with a subnet on Avalanche, it's very similar to interacting with any other subnet. Whereas with layer twos, every layer two is unique and different. So that uniformity is key to adoption and key to interoperability. And we also provide the warp solution for messaging between subnets. So you don't have to have everything replicated on a subnet. You can do your unique things on your subnet and rely on the services of an existing network, an existing chain when it's time to do swaps, when it's time to connect to the real world, when it's time to connect to exchanges and so forth. So that's at a very high level the biggest difference. That is, we provide a unified architecture for people to do any kind of a flexible thing they want, but regardless, maintain the same APIs, the same interfaces for applications.
It's a technical advantage that Gun and the team have built that's really eloquent, I would say. From a business perspective, the developers and the application developers that have come to us, they love it because it's actually a blockchain. I mean, every blockchain should do like probably four things. It needs to execute, it needs to settle, it needs to have a consensus registry, and it needs to have data availability. When you're dealing with the L2s, they don't do all of that. A subnet, you get all of that. And that's very attractive to a lot of business partners.
Maybe touching on that point, John, would love to understand the early I guess the traction that you've been getting. What are the type of, like, are you seeing a lot of developers that have been building on Ethereum or other chains migrate over to Avalanche? Or these new developers that are coming from traditional tech companies that are interested in building? And then touching a little bit on the use cases that you're seeing emerge that are getting most traction in Avalanche.
So the first answer is both. And people have realized you can't batch all the stuff into one blockchain. And that's the beauty of the subnets. It allows developers to have their own execution environment. From the traditional world, a lot of the, call it financial partners we have, they want compliance, they want regulatory oversight, and they need a certain environment that's different from the many gaming environment that have high throughput, and they care about different things. They're different execution environments. So they get that flexibility that Gun talked about earlier and creating the type of subnet they have. Now, we just started rolling out the subnets in the back half of the fourth quarter. There's about 6 or so live on the mainnet, and there's about 100 that's in the pipeline for this year. So it's a super exciting year for subnets.
I guess really curious if you could expand more on when you say kind of regulatorily compliant. As we all know, regulation is becoming more of a central theme and going to become more important. What are the key properties that make you more regulatorily compliant that would make someone like a KKR or a Deloitte want to build on Avalanche versus go and build on Ethereum?
I'll give you a simple answer, but in reality, it's not a simple thing. It's very complicated. It depends on the asset, depends on the type of players involved, it depends on the jurisdiction, whether it's US or overseas. So there's so many different configurations, and this is what's important about the subnet. When you want to roll something out for a payment purpose, or you want to roll something out for a security or an asset that you're tokenizing, you have different requirements. And it's not that as simple as just doing KYC, AML, at the smart contract level. We allow them to choose the validators at the network layer and the validator level. So they are more comfortable with the other players that are in this system. So it allows them more freely to do things.
Is that just the 2023 version of what we saw in 2017 with like enterprise blockchains, these like private blockchains or permissioned blockchains, I guess you want to say?
That's different because those are private blockchains. Here, one of the great things that, frankly, a KKR or one of these large asset managers like is that at some point when they're ready, it can have an easy gate opening, so to speak, or an API into the rest of the permissionless world. That flexibility is what they really like.
Guys, I actually want to go back to something that Emin was saying. So this original thesis, I get what you're saying that like L2s are not composable. Like something built on Arbitrum cannot talk to something built on Optimism too easily. But if you look at, again, like I think that the app chain is kind of coming into, is like really in the narrative right now. I think a lot of folks are building on Cosmos because of that reason. Is that kind of where you took this thesis from? Or is that where, like what Cosmos has done with interoperability between the zones, is that what you're talking about when you mean like composability between networks?
You could say that what Cosmos is doing is very similar to what we're doing. There are some huge technical differences, but Avalanche was in the making when Cosmos was in the making, so I don't think anybody copied from anybody else. I think what you're really seeing at a high level is that there was sort of the blockchain version 1 with Bitcoin, single asset, single chain. Then there was blockchain version 2 with Ethereum, which is multiple assets, a flexible infrastructure, but still a single chain. And now you're beginning to see about 3 chains, which is Avalanche, Cosmos, and Polkadot. They're all about being able to support multiple ways of building chains. And they have technically very different architectures, and they face very different limitations as a result. But we are the most flexible of these, of this version 3 of blockchains, the latest, greatest wave of blockchains.
Jason, it's like this. When this cross-chain interoperability is fully capable, right now, warp messaging is beginning, as Gun said. A lot of these chains, whether it's a gaming app or whatever, in the subnets, they will ultimately have access to the large DeFi ecosystem of Avalanche. That's not possible just an app-specific chain like Cosmos.
So one of the big differences between you guys and maybe someone like Cosmos or Solana or a lot of the other L1s that have kind of these like alt L1s is that you actually chose EVM. You chose to build on EVM instead of a lot of folks. Looking back, do you think this was the right decision, the wrong decision, some pros, some cons? Would you do this again?
I would say that was absolutely the right decision, and we nailed it. We were one of the very first people to go out there and say, enough of these, essentially just modestly mutated new chains, new virtual machines. We already have a virtual machine that's been vetted. It's the EVM. We already have an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is hampered by lack of scalability in the infrastructures that are supporting it. Namely, Ethereum, especially at the time, was incredibly limited. It was based on proof of work. And the proof of stake switch, it wasn't clear when it was going to happen. And if it were to happen, it wasn't clear what kind of capacity it was going to bring. And it did happen now, but the capacity that, it did not bring much capacity to Ethereum, nor did it bring finality. Finality times actually increased. So we saw this and we thought, okay, there's an opening here. The EVM is great for the API developers. People know how to audit things built for the EPM. They know how to audit Solidity code. They understand everything about EVM bytecode. So that's why we picked the EVM, and we've been helping the EVM ecosystem grow by providing a new infrastructure that's far more scalable than Ethereum itself.